So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been a little while since we've seen BHUR SAGATH, so here it is, ever the popular map, and like I said in the last battle replay on Arthedain, I think that's because it's a large settlement that is quite enjoyable if you're the defenders, because it gives you a lot of nice places to defend. You often get quite high kill counts as the defenders here because of how the settlement is laid out, but also the main one I think is that it's stable. It's stable to play on, and it's generally stable to record on as well. Whereas a lot of other cityscape maps in particular, which obviously this is what this map style is, because it doesn't have actually any walls as such, many cityscapes do tend to be a little bit flaky, as I have noted in the past for a lot of people. And considering the variable quality of people's machines, that can be a big factor in deciding what maps get played and completed more than anything else, and BHUR SAGATH is more stable. And while it is one that is played quite often, it has been quite a while since I've actually shown one on here, so we shall begin. And the theme of this one is tricky to quantify, but there is one that I have come up with, and that is that Sauron and the last of his faithful are making their last stand here, and presumably he was successful in his conquest of Middle-earth. However, he's got a bit of a rebellion on his hands, really, and everyone is going to try and throw off the shackles of his rule after his success, and only the last of his Black Numenorian faithful stand with him at this last bastion. So we shall see if they are successful or not. So it's a real smorgasbord as such of attacking forces, starting off with Nevan, who is playing as Rohan, and he's got some Eastmark spears here on the front. Their javelins are useful, and they used to be a little bit less useful when the Prac trait was in the game, because of course they'd throw their javelins and charge in, and as militia spears they were garbage in melee, and still are really. But now it's a little bit less the case. They're a little bit more akin to something like the Orc javelins in terms of usefulness. Maybe not quite as useful as them, but still nice to have around at least, worth bringing in the vast majority of cases. Some Riddermark spears are just some basic spearmen. Of course, as the attackers in a 5v3, you're always going to need to cut some corners somewhere, and they'll do just fine. I mean, I'd say they're not quite as good as other regular spears from other factions because of their armour values, but they are reasonably cheap in comparison, and Rohan do have a higher tier option if they want to spend a little bit more money on that aspect of their army. We've got some Riddermark archers and some Helmingars. I think actually this is a unit which is maybe when the Rangers get changed, Rohan could transform into actually a decent foot archer faction. The fact they don't have a Ranger is really a massive barrier to that at this moment in time in the game, but the Helmingars honestly are not, they are similar in terms of a unit to something like the Bardian Marksmen or the Dalian Archers, for example. But because they don't have a Ranger, people don't really rate their foot archers at all, and nor do I at the moment. But once the Rangers are changed to not have body piercing, the Helmingars could actually prove to be one of Rohan's finer units to bring in most situations. Might change the dynamic of Rohan's skirmish line substantially. Here are the Westmark spears, so the slightly higher tier version. Nice to have, of course, the Westmark infantry, which when going gets tough within the cityscape itself, their decent damage and decent melee defense by comparison should lead them to some good efficiency against some units. Helm's Hammers, all of the factions on the defence today, to some extent or another, rely on their armour, so a unit like this is going to be very useful, as, of course, will the Westmark Marshals, probably my favourite Rohan unit in terms of looks, and in terms of function they're also very, very useful. Medicell's Guard with their javelins, and obviously good performances in melee, and naturally the Shield Maidens, so very much a sort of standard Rohirrim pick. There's the quantities of which can differ depending on what your role is. On the attack on a siege, of course, you're going to see less overall, generally speaking, but there it is nonetheless. We have Angmar, played by Chuck Norris, so the Witch King has decided to try and throw off Sauron's rule, and here he is. He's got some Orc fellas, some Witch Realm pikemen. A lot of his units are hidden because, of course, BHUR SAGATH is kind of weird for the attacker deployment. They're technically in this sort of jungle, this like ashen jungle, so a lot of this area is where you can hide, but of course it also suffers from that glitch where trees sort of pop in and out because there are so many of them. Got some Trolls of Gundabad in there, and the general is a Witch Realm Blackguard unit, but most of the Angmar army is hidden. We saw Barrow Wights there, Blackwatch Legion, naturally. Then we have Allfather, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. This is the second of those that he sent me. Arthedain should be the one that came out just before this. Got some Dalian Bowmen, so he's playing as Dale. Skirmish-wise, they should have absolutely no issues, really. at trading blows with the enemy, which is bad news for the defenders, because that's one of the tools that defenders can always use regardless of the factions involved, as long as the attackers don't try to take that advantage away from them too much. He's also got some Kelvin River Patrol. Cheap javelins, like I just said, can be very, very useful. They're a little bit less tanky than the Eastmark spears because of the shields, but you don't really want to be getting them in harm's way anyway. They can hide anywhere at least, which is nice. Daily and Royal Guard, which I think are armor-piercing arrows now, which is kind of weird because it kind of takes away the whole uniqueness of the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, but both of them are very, very strong bodyguard tier units. Dismounted Earls of Dale, Lake Town Infantry, Dalian Spears, so a sort of full line of heavy infantry, light infantry and spears, and also some extra archer ammo in there as well. More Dismounted Earls, some Sword Masters of Escaroth with the armour upgrades, that'll make them a little bit tankier, and the mighty Dalian Paladins and Blackshot Dragon Slayers. So going for quite a lot of the quality actually with Dale and a lot of the skirmish, so Allfather has definitely chosen his role in this fight. Then we've got Janissary, who's playing as Khand, who we have seen quite a lot of actually recently. And they are quite a fun faction to play, I must say. Brotherhood of the Axe, some Nurad Halberds. There's also the Hwacha, which I'm a big fan of, more so in more open environments, so I think in BHUR SAGATH it could be a little bit difficult to use it effectively if the defenders take up the proper positions. If they don't, then the Hwacha could actually be very effective, so you're relying on the enemy to make a mistake there to get the most out of your artillery perhaps, but it could happen. So it's definitely perhaps worth the risk. And finally, Obese Athlete playing as Arthedain. We have a couple of dismounted Fornost Orion Knights. We've got some Wardens of the North with their AP arrows. We've got some dismounted Knights of Luminous with all the tankiness that they bring to the field. Lots of Arthedain men-at-arms without the armour upgrade, but it's not going to make a huge difference. I don't think they're just going to be here as sort of a tar pit, essentially, both at range and in melee. And then some Dunedain Peacekeepers at the back. So they'll be pretty good against one of the factions in particular on the defence, but yeah, those axes are good at dealing out that base damage, but you've got to be careful because they're not AP, so against certain units they may not be as efficient. Moving over to the defence, we have Sauron's army himself, commanded by awesome Boss Death. He has got some Uruk captains. Once again, the General's Bodyguard, a popular place to put the General's Bodyguard lately, it seems, and I think that's because people have sort of cottoned on to the fact that you want to sort of use your really elite units perhaps a little bit more freely, and the Temple units can be a little bit better when on the front foot, as can the Nazkai. Whereas the Uruk captains are maybe a little bit more defensive in nature, so both Gothmog and who we'll effectively call Sauron in this battle, I suppose. He's looking a little bit diminutive by comparison to what he normally looks like, but he's here. Temple Guard as well, so AP arrows for the defenders. There's a gap here which possibly is the Ardenaeum Shadow Bows. I'd be very surprised if they hadn't been brought. Moran on archers and all javelins, so lots of skirmish, basic stuff. No lower end javelins and potentially rangers as well as AP arrows. A good mix. Olag High. Interesting to see how they get used on the defence. Nazgul, armour upgraded Temple Executioners, so an incredibly scary unit. Minas Morgul chosen to hold the line, 3 units of them, so they'll be really good at holding back the tide. A couple of units of Sauron's Will, some Moran on Halberds. Surprised to only see the one of the Halberds actually, they can be really useful on the defence even with their slightly lower tier nature. Moran on Guard are here as well, and finally a cavalry force, which is quite interesting because we didn't see anything in terms of cavalry from the attackers as such, unless there's some hidden units from Angmar and Khand, which possibly, certainly from Khand, you could expect such a thing. But this is a really, really deadly melee cavalry force between the Melkor's Chosen and Temple Inquisitors, so it'll be interesting to see what the attackers do with cavalry, and if they don't have cavalry, those units could cause some havoc for them on the attack. The first of those that have stayed loyal, Sauron's Faithful, going to be Umbar, played by Marshal Louis Nicolas de Vaux. I'm just going to call him Marshal from now on because I think the last word there I got wrong in terms of pronunciation. I really struggle with French, but there you go. Alcarondas Legion, as far as line infantry goes, of course, fantastic. We've got some Ardenaeum Shield Guard, we've got some Alcarondas Legion as well. Balakath Axe Guard, we've got some Balagai Pikes. Yeah, all of the higher end stuff that you'd imagine. The Balagai units, as far as pikes go, are useful inclusion as well. I think there's more units up here as well, is there not? Yes, there is. Naru, Naaru, Sentinels and Royal Guard. Harbingers of Castamere, maybe a little bit premature in terms of falling back to the final stand. I'd be very surprised if there weren't Castamere's Rangers lurking around in here as well. And finally, we have the other Black Numenorian faithful, Numenor, played by Med Tia. He has got some Pharazim Swordmasters and Royal Legion of Armenelos. He too has got the Naru, Naaru, Sentinels and Royal Guard, albeit with the dark blue colour scheme rather than the burgundy we see from Umbar. Seafarers of Niindamos as well. He's got a trebuchet and a pretty nasty looking position, and the rest of his army is actually down here, which is quite an interesting choice. He's also got a unit of melee cavalry, which can be used very nicely on the offense as well. The Pharazim and Nobles. Numenorian steel bows are here as well. Interesting to see, like, it's really about how you utilise the limited ammo of them, whether they are worth it or not. Seafarers, more Balagai pikes, of course Numenorian cohort are here, as well as the shield guard. So I'll make a little bit of a cut here, because on BHUR SAGATH, of course, the attackers do tend, well, because of the deployment zones, they deploy fairly far away from the settlement itself, and we don't really need to comment over the transition. So yeah, I'll make a cut here, and we'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So here we go, and actually it's not the cavalry that's going to be getting things underway, it's in fact a trebuchet volley that is going to do so. And you can see over here that it actually ended up missing in the end, I think. But yeah, the cavalry ended up just getting pushed back by a series of spear advances, and the cavalry couldn't really get around it. I think that's a little bit disappointing. They need to be a little bit more on the front foot, I think, and try and use some of the wider spaces and take a few risks. If you're not going to take risks with your cavalry, then there really is no point. But you can see the Olag High coming down here under the command of Awesome Boss Death. I mean, I would keep the Westmark Marshals in here, honestly, because if you can get them caught up on the Olag High, those heavy axes will bring the Olag High low. The Eastmark Spearmen, however, most certainly won't. Those large, crude warhammers will certainly do the business against the Eastmarks. But you can see what Rohan want to do here. They want to get their cheap javelins into position. They want to rain down a few javies onto the enemy. And it looks like they were, well, no, they weren't successful actually. The Olag High are just barging their way through. And you can see there are the Melkor's Chosen having moved in. Moranon Archers not necessarily in the best position to try and counter skirmish with the Eastmark Spearmen. There is the argument for saying as well, it's not really a worthwhile target to shoot either, because of the low tier nature of them, and you should perhaps try and instead use the ooh, was that a good shot? This is a little bit more like it. So those ended up hitting nomadic warriors, some Arthedain men-at-arms I think also getting grilled. Back here though, slightly more impressive prey in the Nurad halberds. Nothing too devastating, especially considering how expensive trebuchets actually are, but that's certainly much more like the levels of damage that the attackers will want to be doing with their artillery today. Let's move over here though. Yeah, like I said, you need to be maybe organising yourself a little bit better. We saw in the last battle that Allfather sent me on Londea that the reason why it went in the attackers' favour consistently throughout the battle was because the defenders couldn't organise themselves well enough, and I do hope that isn't going to be the case again today, because you can see here this is a good position for Medtier's archers. Naru Aru Royal Guards going after the right target as well, definitely. Nurad halberds, I mean, they are more of a defensive archer by nature, the Royal Guard, but their missile damage is still better than average, and against unshielded halberdiers, they're obviously going to be able to do the business. Speaking of which though, I mean, the halberd's not the worst thing to be sending forward. I mean, nomadic warriors will bounce right off a Black Numenorian front line like this. You can see the Balagai are in behind the solid Arthedain shield guard front line, so that's a very nasty phalanx. Maybe not a phalanx that deals damage especially quickly, but it is still a very solid one indeed. I would worry a little bit about the gaps around the flank. If the attackers really push in, they could make them pay for that, but hopefully there's enough reinforcements on hand to patch any holes that may appear. It does look as though Khand are going to be the ones taking point here. They've got a little bit of support from Dale as well in the form of these spears, which will be a little bit more sturdy at least than the nomadic warriors, but we shall see. Not really worth pulling the Naru Royal Guard back if I'm being... Actually, yeah, it is. Wardens of the North. I thought it was Lake Town Infantry for a second then, but it's a good thing that the Numenor player was paying attention there, because the Wardens of the North are absolutely not the thing that you want shooting into them, because those AP archers, or AP arrows I should say, will do a lot of damage. Balakith Axe Guard are over here as well, so they've got a nice AP edge to them as well, which sort of takes away the problem of perhaps not being able to deal enough damage. Eastmark Spearmen are going to be throwing at point blank. I mean, this is the moment really where you want to push forward the Moranon Guard, I would say, because the Eastmark Spears are very limited in terms of number, and the Moranon Guard should be able to kill them. This, however, is not really what you want happening. You can see there are Moranon archers firing from on high, which is fair enough, but I did notice there that there were the telltale black streaks of javelins, which were not from the Eastmark Spears. They were coming the opposite direction. I really hope that wasn't something like Corsair Blackguards, because you really need to be saving ammunition on that for later. It could also have been the Temple Guard that were on fire at will, which was remedied pretty quickly. But yes, meanwhile, over here, reorganisation of the line. In fact, the Pharazim nobles are now charging forward. A nice pick there from Medtier. You saw that the unit on the front line here was just a unit of sword line infantry, and now the Pharazim nobles charging in, going to be doing a lot of damage to these basic Khandish footmen. And they're actually moving forward with their line as well, so I quite like this. You know, the attackers thought they had all the time in the world and they could pretty much pick and choose when the engagement happened. That isn't going to be the case. Perhaps this was facilitated by the fact they were being shot by Lake Town infantry, so they thought, well, we may as well get in there. Some of the cavalry units actually getting pinned in by their own men, but that's not really too much of a concern. Arthedain Shield Guard will easily defeat nomadic warriors on the front line just because they're far too tanky. A slight problem may be the Arthedain are a little bit further in front, which may give the opportunity for the Nurad halberds to get some good efficiency. Obviously that AP phalanx will be very useful, but as long as the Balagai pikes are in close attendance, they should be able to counteract that reasonably easily. Meanwhile, Lake Town infantry shooting at, yeah, the right target, definitely. All farther picking out. Lake Town infantry is obviously one of those units of archers which is not really the most damaging. They don't have the most ammunition either, so what kills you can get with these arrows is always a good thing. And going after the unshielded Balagai pikes and actually getting some collateral on the unshielded Balakith is also a good thing, although the Balakith will be able to stand up to that a little bit better because they do have their armour upgrades on this occasion. You can see from the unit that's in here, got that extra Numenorian plate on. They will need a little bit more support to keep this assault going, however, because the quality on the front line here from Umbar and Numenor is going to be too much. But of course, it's definitely the long game when you play as the attackers here. I'm still very surprised, honestly, that Orson Bostaff has not decided to get his Moran on guard in there. You can see they are skirmishing in, trying to go after the Orc Javelins. What archer is that? Just some ritter marks. So again, Rohan, unlike on the other side where things have already gotten fully underway, really, we're still very much in the skirmish phase over on this side. Still a lot of, arguably, even though it's only Moran on archers, arguably valuable ammunition being used on a very, very basic unit by any faction standards. So I'm not sure whether this is worthwhile from him, but he definitely has more important tools, and now we can see the Moran on guard are coming in. Perhaps now they see that you know, they've been softened up enough, perhaps, and they are wavering now. This could be enough to rout them if that volley... No, they're still wavering. Angmar Marauders coming forward, so again, basic unit of Angmar footmen. And it's interesting. I think the Moran on guard, by light of having a slightly more defensive position, should be able to outlast Angmar Marauders, but we're still talking about lower end orc stuff. Neither side really committing anything that's going to be overly important to their chances of winning this battle thus far. Javelins in close attendance means Mordor can afford to be fairly relaxed, and the Olag High giving them a damage spike if they need it. The rest of their forces, however, are interspersed throughout the settlement a little bit more. Over here, meanwhile, not really so much of an orcish presence, definitely the Black Numenorians doing their thing, and you can see the discrepancy in terms of quality on this front line is pretty extreme. The Lake Town infantry out of ammunition. They are intended to be used as light infantry once they're out of ammo, but yeah, against these kinds of units, they're obviously going to struggle. To be fair though, the shape of the line for the defenders is maybe not ideal. You can see that the pikes they're in more of a line. I think it's more of a problem for the Arthedain Shield Guard, honestly. There's still a lot of them alive, but they're sort of a little bit of a bulge on the front line, as it were. I'm not entirely sure that that's going to be... Again, these things can add up, but it's not really all that important. The defenders would be quite happy with how this is going so far, because really the Nurad halberds are the only thing on the front line they would even be slightly worried about. The Lake Town infantry ballooning their arrows up into the air. What are they actually firing at? They're just sort of firing at an area, really. I think they're targeting the Numenor Roar Guard. They're not going to do much damage to them at all. Well, actually, are they? They might be going after the Balakith or the Balagai pikes again. It's just hard to tell when you fire your arrows up into the air like that. Not very effective in terms of the damage you can deal, but when it's Lake Town infantry, it's not really the biggest problem. They may even have more utility as cannon fodder in this particular fight, to be honest with you. And it's not as if the attackers are going to be running low on archers anytime soon, because Dale themselves have brought more, Rohan have brought some. They're going to be fine in that regard. And the defenders are always going to be able to get some good firing positions if they play their cards right, no matter how well you try and counteract against the attackers, especially on a settlement such as this. You can see in the background there the steel bows are looming large. As soon as an elite unit comes forward, you can guarantee the steel bows will immediately open up. Not a huge amount of ammo, but the damage they can deal substantial. Moran on guard moving backwards as the Angmar Marauders come forwards. And they are line infantry, and they are again lower tier orcs, so in a straight up fight, perhaps the Marauders for once have got the advantage in terms of killing power. But like I said, the Moran Guard, if they can get into just formation and hold, spears, the spear animation is superior, so they should be fine, and they've got enough support back here. They've got halberds, so I mean, it should be okay. Riddermark archers in melee. Definitely not the best in terms of outright quality, but it's more numbers. Definitely a sign that so far neither side is really serious about putting some pressure on this particular choke. I think Mordor, they do have reinforcement though. Well, yeah, a lot of Mordor's army is still sort of waiting in reserve behind this building, taking cover. Trebuchet is still here as well, which just in time actually to see. I think they may be out of ammo already. Trebuchets don't have the most in terms of ammunition as the rotting meat hits. Rotting meat actually can kill a unit model if it hits it directly, but only one at a time. And you're not really going to do a great deal of morale damage there because the Arthedain men at arms are not even in the fight as it stands. Meanwhile, mostly Dale actually seem to be picking up the slack now. Javelins coming in. Ooh. Witches from Angmar. Carving a hole in the side of that front line. It's early to use the Witches, and to be honest with you, it's Numenor perhaps should have seen the Witches there. If you think that Angmar brought them, you always need to be on the lookout for them, and steel bows would be enough to rip the Witches apart pretty quickly. And the announcer really enjoying that, feeling as if that's enough to give them a bit of a leg up. The Pharazim nobles once again coming in to get not a full charge, but still connecting okay with the nomadic warriors. More reinforcements are on their way across now, which, I mean, that's debatable whether that's a good idea. The Witches, I think, got into the battle here, which is also somewhat questionable, or did they manage to scurry away? Again, there they are. So they have managed to scurry away in the end, but a good volley there. And they can be saved for another volley till later. If there's the full unit there, they tend to have 2 full volleys in them, or maybe 2.5 before they're done, but they're intent on holding this position, the defenders. Another unit of Arthedain Shield Guard coming in. I think they will need slightly more though. Balakathak's Guard, a second unit of them. The quality over here on the front line is not necessarily the highest, but they've still got Keldon River Patrol in support. Some cheap AP in the Nomadic Axemen, which will be useful later on, especially when the line starts to falter again. And more Balagai pikes are also on the way forward. Corsair crossbows, I think firing in, not wanting to give Dale the opportunity to use those projectiles, which could be enough, to be fair, to cause this front line a little bit of bother. So I'd prefer to use basic archers on them, to be honest with you. There's no need to use crossbow bolts on a unit which is so lightly armoured as the Keldwyn River Patrol. Again, even though they're horribly outnumbered here, the quality on this front line is still enough so far. I think a large part of that is actually because of the Arthedain Shield Guard, because of their ability to hold the line. And you can see there that they are targeting down the Axeman, the Dalians, which again is probably the right choice, because that's what's giving the damage dealing capabilities to this front line. Meanwhile, southern front line, the calibre of units over here has slightly increased, not so much from the Orc fellas, but you can actually see some Barrow-wights are on the way forward now as well. Mordor starting to open up with their javelins, but the Dunedain Peacekeepers, definitely a unit on the front line that Mordor's Moranon units won't enjoy fighting. Ah yes, of course. This announcer, who tends to speak far more often than the others, which is an interesting little thing. Riddermark Spears coming forward, but like I said, the Peacekeepers will do really well against the Moranon Guard. The Halberds are really the thing that Mordor are really relying on here, that phalanx formation. But javelins are being traded back and forth here, and I have to say, Mordor back to the wall. They need more units on the front line, I think. They've got Minas Morgul chosen ready to go. Blackwatch Legion are coming forward. I have to say, Angmar are committing their units at exactly the opportune time, and again, Mordor left dragging their heels and floundering a little bit there. They took a little bit too long, they hesitated, and as we all know, hesitation is defeat. So not a good situation this for Mordor. They need to sort of make a decision here, and honestly I probably wouldn't have committed those Minas Morgul shows. I probably would have fell everything back, to be honest with you, over to here. Get a unit perhaps of rangers if you have them into that position up there and start shooting right down the aisle. As it is, panic stations though it may be, they may actually already be shooting with rangers from the high ground, are they? They are indeed. So this is just as good, really. And perhaps with this position they want to hold on so they can keep shooting their body-piercing projectiles in there. There's nothing of huge import down there, really. The Blackwatch Legion, Barrow-wights, I mean, nothing super elite. You can see the Blackwatch Legion are now actually pulling back in the face of the Olag High, the Melkor's Chosen, so it is a bit panicky from Mordor, but if the Blackwatch Legion don't stick around to help consolidate that hole they made, Mordor will be able to salvage that position, so Mordor will probably be quite pleased with how that has gone. Meanwhile, still over here, finally the numbers seem to be turning against the Black Numenorians as the nomadic warriors... Good lord. What is it with this man? What is it with the Byzantine announcer in Medieval 2? Why is it always him? Why is it that he just cannot bring himself to be quiet for an extended period of time? Still, the Witch is getting another volley off. This one less devastating, to be fair. Numenorian cohort taking a fair amount of damage. Of course, our crossbows getting back into visible line of sight. Balakith's shield bearers coming forward. So with these reinforcements, this will be more than enough to turn the fight around again. Mainly from the Numenor side of things. Dalian bowmen in position. But again, it is worth saying very much that for the time being, the attackers over here haven't really committed forward anything substantial in terms of quality to the melee fight at any rate. The Witches are of course an expensive unit that have made their presence felt, but the Nurad Halberds are the highest tier of infantry we've seen fighting on this front line. Swordmasters of Esgaroth and Dismounted Earls of Dale are close, so I mean that would be a step up in terms of quality. Of course our crossbows are firing their bolts in, but again, glass cannons as they are, they're being skirmished with by Dale, which is never the position they want to be in really, because they're going to get torn apart pretty quickly. And they don't have the best angle. I mean, I'd fall them back, honestly. Their presence might be enough to deter the Witches from coming back for round 3, but we shall see. Well, as we head down this particular street. Ranger projectiles coming into the front line. Riddermark spears, that's enough to rout them. But with the Barrow-wights on the front line, like, this assault is pretty much here for the duration. You're not going to rout the Barrow-wights because they're locked morale. You're not going to kill them really either with projectiles, you're just going to have to wear them down. As we saw once again on Londea, even with high damage axe throwers and javelins, the Barrow-wights take very little damage initially. It really is just a case that you have to weather the storm. They don't do a lot of damage in return, well, over a long period of time technically they do, because they stay alive for so long they pick up a few kills, but you have to understand they're not the most damaging infantry unit. If they're with something else in the blob, then you want to be targeting the other thing generally, because they will be the thing that's doing more damage to you. And it should go without saying really that this choke point was always going to have something on the front line, so the Barrow-wights being here doesn't really change the situation all that much. Westmark infantry coming forward in support, the Olag High in and amongst things over here, as well as the Saurons will now, so there's no shortage in terms of damage from Mordor's perspective on this front line anymore. I don't think the Westmark infantry are going to do too well actually, considering the units that are around them. Olag High will do decently against them. Sauron's wills have got that nasty damage that they deal. Orc fellas are coming forward though. Yeah, there's a lot obviously in reserve here. It's definitely, they're in for the long haul. That much is certain. Meanwhile, it is interesting how the defenders are very keen on defending the outer positions this intently, and I have to say over here on this side I think it's correct. I think Mordor, there's a case for saying that, you know, they've stabilised things, so you can't really argue really with what Orson Bostad has done in many ways. So I mean, the defenders doing the right thing so far, but the quality they've got on the front line is such that you could argue the Barrow-wights should maybe have been committed slightly sooner, because they've absolutely, you can see just the amount of the sheer amount of dead Candish troops on the ground here. Like, they really haven't made much headway. I mean, the Witches have done a lot of damage over here, that's true, but how much damage has the infantry actually done? I'm willing to bet not that much. I mean, the nomadic axemen in here now, armour piercing, can be quite useful, but the quality discrepancy is such they always need support, and unfortunately the Barrow-wights are behind them rather than in front of them. So the time that you choose to commit units can make a pretty big deal. There is actually some wavering going on from the Balakith Axe Guard, which is kind of interesting. There's only 16 of them left, and I imagine the fear being caused by the Barrow-wights is what's making them think about routing. Even as victory was seeming certain for them, and yet they still ended up routing. The Nomadic Axemen are actually pulling back now as missiles being fired in from many angles, really. Castamir's Rangers? Interesting time to be committing them. I really don't think it's the best time for Umbar to be using their Castamir's Rangers. And time again we've seen in 5v3s, I mean, it's not a bad angle firing over that building. You're banking a shot a little bit, and it's not a... well, if you're going after the Witches, I take it back. To go after the Witches is a worthy target, but I don't think you're going to be able to stop them from firing in again. They are dying very quickly now, though, so I mean, it's... I take it back. Umbar noticed something, and they're going for it. And, oh yeah, javelins coming in as well from the Seafarers. Most of them ended up missing, to be honest with you. But yeah, the Witches do get away, so they are still going to be a factor in the battle. But how well you use your skirmish ammunition as the defenders in a situation like this can make all the difference, really, to your chances of winning or losing. But that's worth it. You can't allow the Witches to get a third volley off. I mean, the second one was maybe a little bit lackluster. They got some kills, but it wasn't as devastating as the first, which blew a hole in the side of their line. Meanwhile, Melkor's Chosen did charge forward. You can see now some Arthedain men-at-arms joining the Westmarks on the front line, as well as the Barrow-wights. Minas Morgul, Chosen and Sauron's Will are good quality units, but the shape of the engagement is not really in their favour at this point. Melkor's Chosen trying to charge in. I mean, mass-wise, the Barrow-wights are not going to enjoy that at all. Wasn't the best of charges, but I mean, it's at least they're using their Caragor riders. Again, projectiles are having a pretty hard time. I mean, the javelins are in a decent place. Honestly, I don't think I would be going after the Melkor's Chosen with those. I think I'd be going after the Temple Executioners. Melkor's Chosen, if they manage to break free and start causing havoc down in the base of the settlement again, but that's very unlikely. As the defenders, you can stop that happening very easily. The cavalry has really bottled itself up. So I would probably be going after the Temple Executioners, to be honest with you. The cavalry sort of is slowly making, actually, doing a good amount of damage here to the Westmarks. Not so much against the Barrow-wights, because of course they're still reasonably sturdy with regards to their hit points. But yeah, those maces crashing down on the heads of these men of the mark. And javelins coming forward. Actually, those aren't javelins, those are Dunedain Rangers. Dunedain Rangers firing in there to Temple Executioners and Minas Morgul Chosen. I mean, that's, again, if you're being zeroed in on by Rangers, especially as the defenders, you kind of need to make the choice of whether to go all in or whether to get them out of there. You can't afford to hang around, otherwise, as we know, Rangers can rack up kill counts like no other kind of unit can. Meanwhile, still, they're pushing back here. You can see where the front line started, and slowly but surely the defenders are pushing the attackers onto the back foot. Nurad footmen are on the front line now, which, again, the armour piercing will be quite handy. They tend to be far more efficient than the Balakith shield bearers, but honestly, the precedent has already been set. If they send in yet another unit of Belagai pikemen, it'll shore up this line for the foreseeable future as well. They really only have a unit of Dalian spearmen and Nurad footmen on the front line, and they're going to be dealing damage at any sort of rate, really. The Barrow-wights are here, but that's really just to keep the front line alive. Dalian bowmen are firing in, going after the Castamir's Rangers, but they will probably go into hiding pretty quickly. Actually, no, they're going to try and shoot again. What has he seen this time, Marshall? No, he's firing up into the air this time, so regardless of what he's seen, he's not going to be doing a huge amount of damage, to be honest. If he's going after the Dalian bowmen, it's not really worth it. Yeah, he's trying to shoot the front line, but you're not in the right position to do that. So yeah, I'd pull them out of there. Arthedain shadow bows from Numenor as well, so all three defending factions have got rangers, as you need to have if you want to be competitive, really, in this sort of situation. Barrow-wights are there. Victory seems certain for the attackers at this point. Maybe the defenders have flown a little too close to the sun, but another unit of pikes is going forward nonetheless to try and get even more value off the situation they're in. It has been a bloody assault by the attackers, most certainly. Those Witches may have done a lot of damage over there, but other than that, you have to say the defenders have had a successful front line. You have part of being the defender knows knowing when to fall back. If you just commit everything towards one choke point, more often than not, it doesn't go your way. So you do need to bear that in mind. As does Mordor, who have had probably a much more difficult fight in terms of what they've been dealing with in melee. There's a lot of death on both sides over here. And the Blackwatch Legion are moving through once again. I mean, as soon as the Blackwatch Legion come into contact with the Temple Executioners, they will evaporate, but they should be able to force their way through the Minas Morgul Chosen. as well as the Minas Morgul Chosen can hold the front line, the mass of those two units is just very different. Guardians of Khan Doom are on the front line as well, more Eastmark Spearmen flooding onto the front just to give more numbers. I like this is good. Angmar are engaging in a mass push, and Rohan are trying to follow them in, but Mordor are not allowing them to have things all their own way. The Blackwatch Legion are actually pulling back again, but at this point their unit is depleted enough to the point where they probably won't be able to do that again. Look at them scurry away. It's reasonably quick for a unit in heavy armour. Yeah, now Temple Executioners are on the front line, and a unit of Sauron's Will has been committed forward again. It's a thin front line at this point for Mordor, though. It's an interesting play to commit not Sauron's Will, the Temple Executioners at that moment. I mean, they will destroy Eastmark Spearmen in melee. They'll destroy pretty much anything in melee other than the Barrow-wights in here. I actually saw the Nazgul as well, so the Nazgul are in here from Mordor's perspective. But yeah, the Barrow-wights will be able to withstand the damage that they dish out, at least temporarily, before their hit points are gone. But everything else will struggle against the Temple Executioners. I think weight of numbers is going to be the key. And you can see up here, Narun Aru Royal Guard, this time from Umbar. Only a few of the unit have actually got a line of sight, so are firing. So it's a slow stream of range damage, but at least some sort of support is coming from the cliffs from on high. Meanwhile, ooh, dear, oh dear, oh dear. What is going on there? That is a Witcher volley, if ever I've seen one. And that is a lot of grilled Alcarondas Legion. Again, it can be difficult, to be fair. Like in a situation like this, where all the Witchers need to do is round the corner and then shoot, even if you do manage to get your archers trained on a position, they're going to be able to get their volley off before you can really respond to it. Which, to be fair though, that is something the defenders have brought upon themselves, because they've pushed forwards and made it easier for the Witchers. Nice volley of javelins there going into the Swordmasters and the Earls from the Seafarers of Nindamel, so not quite as devastating as the Witchers to be sure, but I mean this is still going to do damage. A nice amount of damage as well to some of the more impressive Dalian units. But it's been a big committal here, and I think, you know, the fact that Umbar have committed forward yet more units to this fight, I think there's a case for saying that you need to know when to retreat here, and I don't think the Black Numenorians have really done that. At this point, this unit of Seafarers really needs to be the last unit they commit down here and just allow this infantry line to, you know, mulch up as much as it can. But don't try and commit forward anything more. I think the Witchers have probably spent their ammunition at this stage, although they did retreat, so maybe they haven't. Goblin trackers are moving into position as well. I like the way that Angmar have conducted themselves in this fight, however. They've sort of committed some high quality units to both sides and sort of committed them when they felt their allies needed a little bit of a pick-me-up, which is an interesting role for Angmar to play, considering they're usually the, you know, all-in kind of deal, like hyper-aggression, whether on a field battle or in a siege, so it's kind of interesting to see. Dunedain Rangers firing away. That is a problem as well. If the Dunedain Rangers manage to get a hold of this front line, it's not good from Mordor's perspective. Sauron's Will are in there. Yes, the Temple Executioners are here. The Nazgul are probably still around as well, but they're obviously a very hard unit to keep track of, because at least with the Witchers, they are... Ooh, that's a pretty nasty charge in there as well from the Melkor's Chosen, which they can do at this point. I mean, this front line will fall apart, but at least they can cycle charge in and out with the Caragor Riders. That should be enough to do some good damage as well. But yeah, this Mordor front line at this point is on the verge of collapse. If I were the attackers at this point, commit forward more units, which they are doing. More Arthedain men-at-arms being added to the mix. Basic though they may be. Another charge coming in now. I mean, this is doing a lot of damage, to be fair. So Awesome Bosteth has managed to get some good value off of his cavalry, in spite of the fact that they have been effectively forced back into the settlement. That ranger ammunition though. Ardenheim Shadowbows need to get out of there. Yeah, at this point it's time to pull back, and I think everyone on the defence knows it, because regardless of what the Black Numenorians want to do over here, while they may still be fighting and still winning for the most part, I mean it's an even fight, they are running out of steam slowly but surely, but no, I wouldn't commit forward more. I really wouldn't commit forward more, because at this point Mordor are going to collapse. And if you commit forward more, you won't be able to easily peel them away from that front line and retreat up onto at least the second layer. Possibly the third, though. And again, communication is key for the defenders in a situation like this. And I'm not sure whether they're going to... If they do that, Umbar, then it might be the thing which takes this battle. That decision might be the thing which takes this battle out of the defenders' reach, to be honest with you. Those Melkor's Chosen getting caught up on small units. Numenorian steel bows using their ammunition, trying to maybe slow down the momentum of the attackers here. Maybe don't want to use high quality ammunition on units as low end as, well, you know, as middling, I would say, as mediocre as the Arthedain men at arms, but a nice charge. Can't argue too much with that. So they are taking damage as they continue to try and force their way forward. Arthedain shadow bows are firing in, but the attackers can't let this dissuade them, really. They need to move forward. They have the reinforcements to do so. They have plenty of infantry. A lot of it is maybe a little bit more on the higher end side. They're running out of stuff which they can just throw in and not really care if it lives or dies. Maybe the Westmark Spearman counters, that sort of thing. Arguably the Dunedain Peacekeepers at this point in comparison to a lot of other stuff they have at their disposal. But yeah, they definitely need to keep up the momentum over there. Meanwhile, over on this side, yeah, again, another nasty volley from the Witchers. And you have to say, like, the defenders, as much as they've acquitted themselves quite well as far as the melee fight goes and have kept up the fight, they've been quite stubborn in many ways. Like, you need to be a little bit more fluid than this, and if it happens once at the hands of the Witchers, you know, fair enough. Like, the Witchers can catch you off guard. If it happens twice, that sucks, but maybe it can't be avoided. 3 or 4 times, though, and you have to question, like, the defenders, they need to adapt a little bit better. If you're allowing the Witchers to get that much value off, and that will be the last volley from the Witchers now. But yeah, Variag Bowman getting into position, I think, as well. They have got no armour upgrade, but even so, just a basic skirmish archer. Umbar are continuing to commit units in here. Castamir's Rangers are firing in. Again, they will do a decent amount of damage with that body piercing, but is it going to be as efficient as it could be? So Dale taking a bit of damage. To be fair, I think the fact that Umbar have committed forward units, I think they were going to retreat, to be honest, the defenders, but they've committed units over there, so they have set up a second front line, which may actually not be the worst thing. It probably will actually frustrate the attackers a little bit. They may have felt as though they had the momentum to sweep the first layer clean, and in the end they don't, so they're going to have to wait a little bit more for the hour of their victory down here, potentially. Numenorian steel bows are in melee now as well. They're not as good, obviously, as the dedicated infantry on this tier for the Numenorians, but they'll still do a decent job. I mean, they're still heavily armoured, and you could certainly do far worse as far as an infantry unit goes, and they do have their dedicated infantry right there as well, should it be required. The AP spears, and of course the really nice base attack on the Numenorian cohort as well. Definitely capable of doing the business there. Helmingas are here. Numenor are back there as well. Pharazim nobles just biding their time, hoping that they can do just as good as the Melkor's Chosen have done at getting value for themselves. Alcaron Last Legion at this point are losing ground a little bit, perhaps. Again, there's a lot of Nurad footmen on the front line. There's also Swordmasters of Esgaroth, which, you know, I'd still say the Alcaron Last Legion overall are the better unit, but at this point, between the AP and the high base attack of the swords, you've got all your bases covered, really. You need the pikes a little bit closer to the front as well to really get the most out of them. You've also got ranged support coming in, shooting at the supporting units, which are just sort of stood there like lemons. Not really offering a whole lot. But it is, you know, at this point, this is Umbar's front line. Numenor don't really have anything left over here because they've sort of taken charge of the front line on the other side. So this is Umbar's front line to do with as they please. And I mean, they have got the quality on the front line at this point to hold it, but the ranged support at this point is coming from the attackers, and they have the kind of units on the front line which can be efficient, so all of that means it's probably going to be tough, really. Tough for Umbar to get the kills they want. Arthedain shield guarded there, so I mean, Umbar, clearly, the defenders here are playing this like Umbar at the very least. They don't want to fall back, they are sticking to task. I mean, maybe it works, but I've seen it fail more often than not when the attackers try and do things that way. You need to try and make use of the settlement as a whole more so, sort of pick and choose when to fall back, rather than just sort of stubbornly sticking to one point, because if you do that, the attackers can adapt to it, and it can be tough. The Blackwatch Legion trying to push through again, and they have kind of succeeded, to be fair. So fair play to them, but that surely will be the last time they can do that to that extent. The Uruk captains are getting onto the front line now with their AP. That is certainly bad news for a unit like the Guardians of Kharndoom, and actually for the Arthedain men-at-arms, who are already depleted, so I'd imagine that a rout is on the way. So it's interesting. Over on the other side, where the defenders started off doing really well, things have slowly started to tick in the attackers' favour. Over here, the attackers throughout most of the fight have done slightly better, but now in this position, now they're a little bit closer to the range support, that's a little bit nicer for them. The defenders have started to have things more their own way. More of the infantry has been committed forward from the side as well. Numenorian cohort. It's going to be painful over here for the attackers, but maybe they're counting on breaking through over here. But I mean, if they're going to do that, they need to commit forward slightly more to maybe facilitate things, which Dale looks like they're doing. They're committing forward their Earls, which are pretty much the match, I would say, of the Alcarondas Legion. And they're trying to push through the lines at this point. Is there anything else they can commit? There's a unit of Nurad footmen ready and waiting. Those Variag warriors are a little bit far away, but they're sort of trying to keep out of harm's way of the archers, I guess. But the time may be now for them, honestly. They might need to move forward and just commit everything they have to this fight. The red footmen are there, but yeah, I would say, I mean, Dale are trying to make something happen, which is good, but Balakith's shield bearers are moving in. Again, the AP will be nice against the Earls. And also you can see from the side there, the Castamir's Rangers. Actually, that's the second unit of Castamir's Rangers, I think, because the other one was really, yeah. So he's brought 2 units of Rangers. You go into the red limit pretty hard if you do that, but I mean, it's a very viable strategy, to be honest with you, considering how powerful Rangers can be. And that's the perfect blob to go after, so maybe they can really make things work over here. Mordor coming down with their Temple Inquisitors. The Numenorian cohorts are also moving in. I mean, these are units which are not spearmen after all, so you can try and use your cavalry charges, but it's maybe not the best area to try and charge in with your cavalry. A little bit awkward to get the charging position that you may want. Looks like those Rangers are going after the footmen, which is a little bit questionable. Their shields from the front are going to be enough to really do the business, you would think. More arrow fire from the Narona Iron Guard, Umbar's version actually. Not the best angle, but I mean, they're still connecting with some of those arrows at least. Moran on archers getting into position. I mean, if you're Awesome Boss Death, honestly, I don't think you care too much that they're getting shot, to be honest with you. They're one of the more sacrificial units in the entirety of the defending roster. But the Helmingas are still pouring that ammunition into them. The Moranons can also... They actually... No, they do still have ammo at least, so they're just going to be trading fire. So this is going to be pretty much a dead heat between both sides. Yeah, those Numenorian steel bows and cohorts, as good as the Dunedain peacekeepers are, the lack of AP does mean that the Numenorian cohorts are going to beat the brakes off them in melee. Westmark spearmen slightly depleted, they're moving on to the front line. They'll keep the front line going for a little bit longer, but they're not exactly the damage dealing showstopper that is going to be required to lay this front line low. And I know the attackers may not want to put some of their really good stuff in harm's way, but something needs to be done here. They need to try and break through the front line somehow. Perhaps the Helm's Hammers wouldn't be the worst thing on that front line. Dismounted Knights of Numenor would offer some tankiness, but maybe not the damage required. Shield Maidens would be an interesting choice. A lot of their high damage stuff, like their Axemen and their Axe Throwers, will be targeted by archers immediately as they come forward, but I mean, they're trying to wear the enemy down, which, I mean, to be fair, they're pushing through with the Westmark spears, but what do they have that can take advantage of that? There's no infantry nearby that can follow them through. Meanwhile, over here on this side of things, once again, the Balakith shield bearers, it's a question of numbers over here, and eventually Umbar are going to run out of steam, but my god, if they fought tooth and nail to keep this choke point on their side, the defenders, eventually the attackers are surely going to break through here, though, especially with a high amount of Nurad footmen and Earls of Dale. Like, those are line infantry units that should be able to match the Umbarim at this point. The pikes are breaking. It's a very thin front line at this point. They're shooting at the cavalry, which is pointing the wrong way, but the Inquisitors don't have shields anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the Variag bowmen getting some good kills, which, when you're on the attack, if your basic bowman can get some good kills, like, you'll take that regardless of what it's against, really. They've still got Black Shots, they've still got Paladins, still got Royal Guard. All of the important units for pretty much all of the attacking armies, I would say, are intact, other than maybe the Witchers. Canned as well. Did they actually have any? They have the Watcher. They've got the Brotherhood units, but that's pretty much it.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
But yeah, the scariest stuff from the attackers is still yet to come. which is where I think the defenders are going to fall short a little bit. They've poured so much of themselves into holding these choke points, and that's probably why a lot of the time you see this tactic fail, because you pour pretty much all of your best stuff into dealing with the enemy's basic stuff, and then later on your best stuff is tired and depleted. The enemy's stuff, best stuff, is fresh, ready to go, and ready to do the business. And Dale's bodyguard tier units are just waiting for their opportunity here. And this is a healthy unit of Arthedain shield guard as well, which could find itself on the wrong end of this particular fight. More arrows streaking in. Damage being dealt. Temple Inquisitors. Yeah, it's looking pretty grim. I mean, there's some Corsair crossbows. What are they going to be firing at as we follow the bolts in? I mean, that's a decent blob to go after, especially when the cavalry gets out of the way. I mean, they should be able to do some half-decent damage here to the Earls. It's interesting as well, the Witchround Blackguard is actually on the front line as well, so Angmar have committed their most elite units. Pulling them out again, though, I think that's probably the one area where I would say, with the Blackwatch Legion, that is a good tactic to do, actually go in and out, but I think with the Blackguard, it's a little bit more questionable. Like, you need to get through here at this point quickly, I would say. You have the momentum, you need to keep the momentum. Can't afford to give Umbar hope that they can get yet more damage done to your armies. Meanwhile, very thin choke point this, and you can tell that eventually the attackers have decided they're going to throw caution to the wind and send forward some of their more vulnerable units to arrow fire. The Orc fellas, but especially, of course, the Westmark Marshals. You can tell, though, they have been targeted by arrow fire, very much so. But I think the time has come for this sort of thing to happen. Like, you have the advantage, I think, at this point. I think the attackers are in the ascendancy, so I think it does make a lot of sense to try and handle things in this manner. More arrows coming in. Victory is a distinct possibility for the Orc fellas, and yeah, like Numenor at this point don't have enough on the front line really. The Uruk captains, I should say, are still in there. They'll do more damage to the defenders, but is it going to be enough? I don't know. They're setting up, they've got units back here, they're sort of ready, they know it's coming, the defenders, but they've poured so much. I think it's this choke point over here where they've overcommitted, to be honest with you, and a lot of that is down to Umbar. And once you've gone all in like this, you can't really help but just continue to do that, and I think that's what he's tried to do here. Naruna Iron Royal Guard out of ammunition, being committed to the front line. They're tanky, but again, like, matchup wise, they're going up against AP infantry, depleted though they may be. There's still Barrow Whites here. It's a lost cause in many ways. Dalian Bowmen are ready. Veriag Warriors, they have got the armour upgrade, interestingly enough, and they are ready to commit themselves to the fight as well to keep this infantry assault going. It has been punishing for the attackers, but they shouldn't be too disheartened, because ultimately I think they have been on the better end of this fight. As the longer it's gone on, the better it's been for the attackers, really. There was a point in the middle of that fight where, to be honest, the defenders had gotten what they wanted out of that fight, but then they carried on. They stuck around for too long in many ways. And they may make, I mean, I think this is kind of a theme at this point. Like, Umbar has committed more in there, and I think perhaps Mordor and Numenor have looked at that. I might be wrong here, and it may be that Mordor and Numenor would have done this anyway, but they probably looked at that and gone, well, he's not moving from his choke point. If we fall back, his whole army's going to get killed for basically nothing, and we'll go on to lose the fight. So we need to commit more to the front line. So we're going to commit Naruna Iru Sentinels, out of ammunition shadow bows, and keep holding this choke point for longer. And to be fair, I've often said that even if your ally, you perceive them as doing something wrong, if you don't assist them, either directly or indirectly, then you're going to end up losing anyway. You can't just hang them out to dry. So Mordor and Numenor actually doing that is, I think, for the best, because it means they're not hanging Umbar out to dry. And while I do think it's questionable how long they've decided to stay on this front line, you need to accommodate that if you're the defenders, because if you don't, they're going to end up dying for no reason, really. A lot of the Arthedain are on the front line now. Temple Inquisitors, and to be fair, the Pharaohs and Nobles are trying to charge in. They do have an opportunity to do so. The Barrow Whites, I mean, they've been on the front line for long enough that now they're going to start taking damage, I think. They do charge in there, maybe enough to kill off a couple of Barrow-wights, better than nothing at this point. You're not really going to get a better opportunity to use the cavalry after all, so you may as well make hay while the sun shines. Is there anything else streaking down here? I don't know. Have Umbar got anything left, I think would be an interesting question, or have they committed everything? Numenorian Shield Guard, that is a Numenor unit. I think they still have their Harbingers and Castamere somewhere, which are probably up here in the final stand, are they not? And their Sentinels. So they've got 2 units back here. Moranon Archers continuing to fire from on high, going after the Dunedain Troll Slayers. A good choice of target for Morton Boss Death. They are multiple HP, I believe, still, but very low armour. So as soon as those hit points are gone, they're such a damaging unit as well. That's the thing. Like javelins and axes, as far as all-round armour piercing goes, they are one of the truly scary units that Arthedain have at their disposal. A lot of Arthedain's rank and file are very average. Like, they are quite reliant on their pikes because, while they're average pikes are still good in comparison to a lot of other units by Medieval 2's mechanics. But stuff like the Men-at-Arms, the Evendim units, very functional. But the upper end of Arthedain's faction with the Dunedain, the Peacekeepers, Wardens of the North, but especially the Rangers and the Troll Slayers, they're the damage dealers, really. And that's what makes Arthedain a faction worth playing, I think. They have that split between their entry level and their quality, not unlike Dorwinion, actually. That is Ranger Fire from somewhere, is it not? Where's that coming from? Ah, here it is. Yeah, that's a nice angle, actually, for those Ardenaeum shadow bows to fire into. I do think Arthedain gets that split between sort of functional quantity and then quality. I think they do it a little bit better, to be honest with you, than Dorwinion. And I think that's because they're high tier units. Like, when you face Dorwinion, you always know that the Morroquendi, you need to deal with them. If you can deal with them, the Elvelen are not going to be sufficient to win Dorwinion the fight, really. Not unless it's one of those fights that comes right down to the wire and the Elvelen can, like, dig in. But as far as, like, actual damage dealing goes, they're not really going to be up to the task. And yeah, the Morroquendi, you need to just deal with them, and they are fragile in many ways, the Morroquendi, in much the same way as the Sylvan Elves are. Shield mains are in position now, though, and there's nothing really stopping them from just getting into position and throwing their axes. The Castamere's Rangers that are out of ammo are being committed to the front line, so yeah, Umbar are just throwing everything in, hoping that they can get more damage done. But I mean, the shield mains, it's worth actually, because they've got 2 units of them, I think it is actually worth just blowing these Castamere's Rangers apart with those axe throwers, not allowing them to do anything in melee. Dalian Paladins are on the front line, and they will absolutely dominate Ardenaeum Shield Guard. It's one of the worst matchups you can ask for, I think, if you're those high tier Black Numenorian Spearmen, and it's taken some doing, but I think at this point Umbar's effort will finally be done for. Those are the Telltale Whistle of Crossbow Bolts. They are going after the shield mains of Rohan, but it's going to be far, far too late to save this front line. Another unit of Nurad Halberds is going to roll in just to really make sure of the fact, adding a Phalanx into the mix. You can see Umbar there sort of bravely trying to sort of burrow their way into the line to try and take that Phalanx's effectiveness away from it, but it's not going to make a difference at this point. Over here, though, Numenor and Mordor's efforts have actually borne quite a lot of fruit. Those Westmark Marshals are taking a lot of damage on the approach. It's going to be the Steel Bows and the Shadow Bows doing their thing. I'm not sure how much ammunition the Steel Bows have left. Very limited ammo supply, of course. It makes the value proposition on the Steel Bows, I think, somewhat questionable, because it's far more likely, actually, that you end up not getting the damage that you need. There goes the Mordor General, the doppelganger for Sauron on this occasion. So he has fallen on that front line. The Uruk Captain's taking pressure. They're going after Troll Slayers, I think, or Westmark Marshals, or both, actually. They're going to get hits on both, which is definitely a good thing for them. Black streaks of the AP arrows. The black arrows themselves represent poison arrows. I think maybe different colour coding would do. I think Silmarillion, for that reason, I think Silmarillion Total War changed the armour-piercing arrows to have a green trail, whereas the poison arrows maintain their black trails. Westmark Marshals getting into the front line. that AP will be useful. The Nara and Irish Sentinels are on the verge of defeat at this point. The Trolls of Gundabad were committed. They've been damaged very heavily, but I mean, at this point, the defenders, it's a brave effort, but surely at this point, the first layer is going to be sewn up. Dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights coming forward, nice heavy swordsmen. That will probably end up with shadow bows firing into them. They're decently armoured, but man, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. Having a look at this. Yeah, they're ahead, the attackers, which at this stage in the battle is bad news for the defenders indeed. Of course, their crossbows out of ammo being charged. I mean, to be fair, this is a good opportunity for the cavalry. This is the opportunity for the cavalry, really. They need to charge in and out as best as they are able. Try and get as much damage done as they possibly can. Dalian Paladins have actually been charged into oblivion, really, so that's been worthwhile. This is often where the attackers can clean up for themselves in terms of kills, but it could be the other way around here with the defenders if they play their cards right with the cavalry. Once again, Pharazim Nobles could charge into these Shield Maidens and really do some nasty damage to them. Is that what's going to be the case? The stretched nature of the Shield Maidens there probably actually saved them, because that was the best place to charge, but Medieval 2 wants to go centre mass of the unit, and that was actually where the Shield Maidens were least numerous. As long as they can outmaneuver those halberds, it's a good opportunity here for the Pharazim Nobles to get some good killing done. As they charge in again, this time though the halberdiers will be able to get hold of them, and one of the Numenor riders does end up falling as a result. Temple Inquisitors coming in, it's a bold charge to be sure. Right into the teeth of halberdiers. A few of them do fall, but that's going to be far more painful for the Inquisitors, you would think. And so it turns out to be, but how much longer is that cavalry going to be useful? The Melkor's Chosen, I think, is probably biding its time waiting to charge into this position over here, but I don't know if they're going to be given the opportunity to do that, because the Dunedain Troll Slayers are going to try and take that option away from them, and with each javelin volley over there, they are significantly damaging the Melkor's Chosen. The squealing of pigs from this pig farm, I guess. But yeah. Shadow bows also being committed forward. I mean, at this point, again, over-committal, I think, is probably going to be the theme of this battle, because I do think the attackers from this position are going to go on to win the fight. And I think it's because the defenders just couldn't let go of their initial defensive positions. They started off reasonably well on both sides, and they were like, yes, we can make this work. We're going to throw everything into it, and I think that has ultimately been the issue. Black shots are here. There's still units running around, Corsair crossbowmen, which are of course going to be run down by the men of the east and the men of the north. As good as crossbow Corsairs are, they're dealing damage at range, and everything else, they are not the best. This should be a good charge though. Slipping the net somewhat there, those Pharazim Nobles, and getting a very nice charge onto the Shield Maidens. They're going to need more of that, the defenders, if they have hope of winning the battle. But I don't believe they can do it. I mean, Khand and Dale are very depleted, but they still have Dragon Slayers and Royal Guard. They still have some Brotherhood units as well. The Watcher is still there, but I don't really think the Watcher is going to come into play in this battle, to be honest with you. You're more likely to do damage to your own men in a settlement like this when it turns into a fight of this nature. They're still fighting hard on this front line, but at this point even the quality has abandoned them really, with the dismounted Knights of Numenor, the Fornoster Rain Knights from Arthedain coming forward, taking the lead on this side of things. Arthedain for the attackers and cleaning up really. They still have some strong units, the defenders, Pharazim Swordmasters, Royal Legion of Armenelos. They still have the Sentinels as well. Right, Medtier needs to get these Royal Guard out of here at this point. He can't afford to be imming and ahhing like this. He needs to get this unit out of here, up the choke point before it gets cut off. Otherwise it will be a failure. They need every man available to them, especially of a tier like that. But like I said, Sentinels from Umbar, good pike unit. The attackers certainly won't have anything on its level, but it is only the one unit. Is that going to be enough to base a single defence around? I'm not so sure. I mean, based on the amount of frames remaining, it's going to be... The attackers are going to throw everything at the defenders, I think. And that is probably the last thing the defenders want. I think the defenders would have wanted them to sort of slowly commit units in. And that could have been how they ended up being victorious here. but I don't think that's going to be the case on this occasion. Pharazim nobles are still trying to make a nuisance of themselves, but they end up routing in the end, which for a unit like that to rout is obviously all hope is lost, really. Yeah, those Numenor Royal Guard are going to get away. At this point, what's going on over here? There's still some Melkor's Chosen loitering around the place. There's only 4 of them though, so even if they do get a good charge off, like, they can do decent amounts of damage if they get like a really nice charge. They could do so here against the Variag warriors, but it's a good opportunity to sort of deal with them once and for all. Yeah, you can actually see that was a really nice charge, and they end up doing a ton of damage really. But as soon as things get down to brass tacks in melee, those large curved blades should be enough, and yeah, they end up routing. But it was a decent last charge. You're not really going to be able to do much else with them, so you may as well put a dent in a healthy unit of infantry. Don't disagree with that that move at all. But I think at this stage it is going to be a case of, and now we wait. In fact, we will go up, I think, to ×6 speed on this occasion, just to fill the gaps. It's not really worth making a cut at this point, because we are into the final phases of the battle. And it is going to be, I think the problem the defenders are going to have as well is they've dumped so much of their attentions into other areas. Do they have any ammunition left? These Temple Guard have got their swords out, so probably not from them. That's a concern. It's a real concern, to be honest. Because what do? Well, the only hope they really have is just put all your units into a big choke point blob here and hope that they can do the business. And I think actually they are going to charge outwards, which I like. This is something that I enjoy. Like, their chances of victory are limited at this point because the attackers have got the quality, they've got the range support, and they've got the numbers. All 3 things that you can't really counteract so easily. The pikes are in here now, so we will actually go down to regular speed once again. So you may as well at this point sally forth and hope that the attackers aren't organised enough to deal with you, and that you can deal with them in that way. I mean, Moran on archers are routing though, because I mean it's big boy time at this point on the front line, and Moran on archers have got no business mixing it with any of the attacking or the defending units really. Harbingers of Castamere, Pharazim Swordmasters, Shield Guard. I mean, these are all good units, they're just not in the quantities that are going to be required, and they don't have the support that's going to be required either. When you've got all of these units ready to go. There's actually a unit over here of, what is this? Numenor Royal Guard, they got left behind, I guess. And they are being swallowed whole, unfortunately for them. And so we turn our attention over here. And you can see here that these dismounted Fornoster Rain Knights and the dismounted Knights for Luminous are getting absolutely butchered by Pharazim Swordmasters. Javelins and axe throwers trying to do their thing. The attackers being a little bit stingy here, which will give the defenders the opportunity to get a few more kills, but not enough to give them victory. I think I'd be very surprised if they got victory. A chain rout is not impossible, I suppose, if they started to kill off units. Yeah, the discrepancy I think is just too great at this stage. Forward come the depleted Witch Realm Blackguard, but I mean it's better than having just any old garbage at trying to stop the Pharazim Swordmasters. And as if on cue, the Helm's Hammers also arrived. Their armour piercing will be useful. Variag warriors getting in here, adding some much needed numbers to the front line. Wards of the North firing away. You can see all of the supporting tools that the attackers still have. Multiple Troll Slayers, Wards of the North, both units of high-end Dalian archers. There goes our Pharazon. It is worth saying though, I mean a lot of these units they're sending to the front line initially, like in terms of quality, like, the defenders will butcher a lot of these units. Like Variag warriors, armour upgrade or no, are no match for any of the units that are coming forward. It's one of the reasons I actually do really rate the fact that the attackers have counter-attacked here, because it's the way that they are definitely going to get the most mileage out of the units they have left, even if they don't really stand much of a chance at winning, because they're going to be pelted by ranged ammunition. And by which point, like, even though a lot of these units are primarily ranged bodyguards, like by the time they empty all their ammunition into them, the Medicel Guard, the Wards of the North, Dalian Royal Guard, Black Shots, they're all going to be enough to defeat all of these units in melee. But you can see here, giving a good accounting of themselves. In come the Brotherhood units, they're a little bit more like it. Brotherhood of the Sword will give a better accounting of themselves than the Variag warriors will in this kind of situation, and the Royal Legion of Armenelos have delved too far at this stage. They may be individually stronger than all the units around them, but they are overwhelmed at this point. And interesting to see a unit of healthy orc fellas alive in the late game. You don't often see that when you see Angmar on the assault. They usually are one of the first to go. There are the Harbingers. Lots of projectiles coming in. Yet it's just gotten away from the attackers here. The attackers, the defenders. For the attackers, this has been good for them. I'm sure they were probably fairly frustrated throughout most of the battle, to be honest with you, at the fact that the front lines would just refuse to budge, and in a few cases actually they were being forced back, but it's all about patience. They just remained calm, committed units as they had to, and in the end they utilised their resources well enough. And like I said, this battle, it has been a tale of overcommitting. Had to know when to let go of your front lines when they become unsustainable, and that is something the defenders simply did not do in this battle. Having said that, they organised themselves far better, I think, than the defenders did on Londea in the last battle replay that we saw. I will say as well, though, that BHUR SAGATH is... you really need to be doing something wrong if you organise yourselves incorrectly on BHUR SAGATH, because, you know, it is obviously a very constricted settlement. Whether on the attack or the defence, like, you should be able to organise your armies reasonably easily. Still, the Numenorians fight hard on the front line, though, as we enter near enough the final 1,000 frames of this encounter. Troll Slayers getting round the back. Still some Temple Guard in there as well, but a nice rear charge from these Axemen, or of course a nice volley, and it is going to be a volley. There goes the Umbar general, so that's all of the defending generals now gone, and they are going to reload, which is a weird way of saying it, but that is what javelins do. They reload, and I think that's them out of ammo. I think they had like literally one. No, there they are. This is going to be pretty nasty. Troll Slayers, as far as javelins go, are pretty lethal, shooting into the back there, and this is going to be the end of this defence. They were gritty, the defenders, but they were gritty to the point of being too stubborn. Yeah. But well played to the attackers. Another victory for them, and Sauron's faithful, ultimately the last holdouts, are gone. BHUR SAGATH falls. So what does this mean for Middle-earth in this scenario? Sauron was victorious, but then he was overthrown. So I mean, who really comes out on top there? Are the Valar happy? Are they not? Who can tell? And who can tell which of these this various alliance will be dominant after this? I'm sure the Witch King would have designs on having that all to himself, but we shall see. Or we won't. We'll have to just imagine. Dunedain Troll Slayers coming in from behind, and that is going to be that. Orc fellas also wanting a piece of the action. But a good battle. Definitely one of those siege battles that was, you know, slow-paced and, you know, the grind, essentially. BHUR SAGATH often is the personification of a grind in many ways. But still an interesting one to behold, because it is, you rarely, I think, and there we go. Oftentimes I'm here talking about how the attackers haven't committed enough, and or the defenders rather, haven't committed enough, and they go in too much, or the attackers haven't committed enough. But on this occasion it was a case of the defenders committing too much to front lines. And it is a delicate balance, and to be fair, like, when a battle is happening, you don't really know when the best time to stop is and when it isn't, but there you go. Highest kill count was for Numenor. I think that was mainly because their rangers got into the best and most advantageous positions. Umbar's rangers were used more to counteract enemy skirmishers, which is probably why he got the lowest amount of kills. He was also probably the most guilty of committing too much to those front lines, like I said, but to be fair, Mordor and Numenor could maybe have insisted in the text chat that he fall back, and they also engaged in that sort of thing as well. So yeah, I think well played to the attackers though. I think in particular I quite like the way Angmar played, not just because they got the most amount of kills, but I like the fact that they were committing those units in support of their allies as and when they needed them. So I do like the way that Angmar handled themselves here, but really all the attackers did what they had to. Let's see what did the damage for Dale, which is quite interesting because it was a punishing front line for them. The Royal Guard and Dragon Slayers were never really involved in the battle. The Paladins were, and they did a lot of damage initially to the Arthedain, but then of course the cavalry killed them. Dalian Bowmen doing quite well. as did the Keldon River Patrol, and I think that's pretty much the story behind Dale. Their basic skirmishers did quite well as their infantry was thrown into the meat grinder. Like, the support that Dale offered to their front line was really the thing, which certainly helped them, I think. So I think Allfather really, that was really the only way he could have played the game in many ways, because of the way that Umbar decided to handle the situation. And the same goes for Janissary as well, at the hands of Cand, because those were the two over there. And I don't think you can argue too much that was the case on the other side either, where it was mainly a 3v2. I think Angmar were a little bit more on both sides. They had a couple of units here and there, whereas Arthedain and Rohan were fully trying to go down that route as well. But yeah, big thank you to Allfather for sending this battle to me, and big thank you to all of the players for being a part of it. So naturally, BHUR SAGATH may be a battle map that's played on quite a lot, but in much the same way as Tol Falas, which the old version of Tol Falas, I've rejigged my schedule, and I believe, based on the way that I planned it, the old version of Tol Falas should be the battle map coming up after this one. However, what I'm going to say at the end of that battle is also what I'm going to say now, which is we're probably not going to see BHUR SAGATH for a little while after this. For a long while after this, to be honest with you, because again, I don't want to repeat maps too often, and as much as this map may get played on again and again and again, I can't show it again and again and again because it gets stale, right? It's been a fairly long time since we've seen it, which is the reason why I'm using it now, to be honest with you. It's not a bad map by any means, but variety is the spice of life and is the lifeblood of my channel also, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it was good though. It was nice to see BHUR SAGATH again because it's a decent map, but hopefully people do use the wider catalogue of maps in Reforged that are available, because there are more out there, and while a few of the cityscapes are questionable in terms of their stability, a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable, and people just don't seem to use them. It's like people sort of get themselves into a comfortable little rut and then refuse to move from it. Exploration, I think, is the key here. But yeah, regardless, that's by the by, really. In much the same way as the others, like channel update stuff, schedules, all that sort of business I've already mentioned at the end of most other stuff, and it's fairly clear at this point what I mean by that. Hopefully by this point, certainly by this point, I imagine the first update will be out, which will let people know what's going to be happening in the short term up until the end of February. And then another update will probably happen sort of late December, probably early January though, because obviously Christmas and New Year is there, which will sort of let people know what is likely to happen to the channel following late February when the Masters is complete, because obviously there are a lot of permutations there. Regardless, big thank you to Allfather and all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.